are listening to the 90 Days Later podcast with Anna Charles, episode 108. Welcome to the 90 Days Later podcast, where I show you how life with less alcohol is more fun than you think. I work with high achievers who struggle to drink a glass of wine without it turning into 2 bottles. I'm the one they call when they want to take it or leave it. So if you want to change your relationship with alcohol that doesn't involve counting days sober, you're in the right place. Hi everybody, welcome back to the podcast and Merry Christmas. So this podcast episode is being released on the 26th of December, Boxing Day. If you are in the UK, I hope you're having a really smashing festive time with your friends and family. And what I thought I would talk about today is habits, the idea of habits and reward and the connection between the two. As usual, it's going to have content here that you can take away and use, right? Remember, I'm all about pragmatically and practically taking action to change the drinking, the way you drink, if that is not something that serves you. So I want to start by talking about what is a habit. It is quite simply repetitive behavior. I mean, really, that's it. And I think habits tend to get a pretty bad reputation because when I just say the word habit, what do you think of? You're likely thinking of something that you do and repeat that you don't like doing or you don't really want to be doing. The topic we talk about a lot here is over drinking. We have a habit of drinking too much. Maybe you have a habit of eating too much. Maybe you have a habit of scrolling too much on your phone when you're bored. But I want you to think of habits in a different light, not just this very one-way street of, habits are bad. Habits are really, really useful. I believe this so strongly. Habits underpin our human lives. You only have to consider and imagine life without them to see this, right? Think about this. If every time you picked up a pencil, you had to think about it, right? You couldn't just do it by habit. You wouldn't just do it by rote. Same with standing up or drinking a glass of water, even remembering how to drive to your place of work, and so on and on and on. These are all things we do. These are habitual responses we have, habitual repeat behaviors that we've taught ourselves. We did not come out of the womb knowing how to hold a pen. So while we talk about good and bad habits, right, we do talk about that. I actually don't find that kind of language helpful, because it can start to, create a sense of judgment. So I prefer to talk about habits that serve us. For instance, the habit of going out for a run every other day, or maybe habits that don't serve us, such as drinking too much wine each evening. Right? Again, it just removes the judgment. The judgment doesn't help us at all. But whatever the habit, whatever it is, whether it's something that serves you, doesn't serve you, it's simply repeated behavior. This is down to efficiency and to the brain's wiring. I have covered this on the podcast before. This is really important to understand. We are programmed as humans to be efficient. I want you to think about it in these terms, right? I used to be in corporate. And in corporate, big companies, we would have a research and development department, which was all about inventing and developing and testing and trialing new products. Right? Lots of effort would go into creating something new. Some of it would pay off, a lot of it wouldn't. And then we had another part of the company which was called operations. And basically the operations team was responsible for manufacturing and selling any existing products, right? So we create products in the R&D department, and then they'd move into operations, and then that would be there for mass sales and mass delivery. We needed both in the company. Imagine if you had a company that all it did was just develop new products. It didn't do anything with them, didn't manufacture them, didn't sell them, didn't promote them, didn't market them. Wouldn't have much of a business. On the other hand, imagine you have a company that just delivers the one established product. Now, of course, you can have a successful business doing that, but it is going to be time limited. History has taught us this. My favorite example is in the area of refrigeration, right? Before we had refrigerators, there were companies that would go around with ice blocks. They'd bring an ice block to your house where you could keep your foodstuffs cool. That's what they would do. They'd bring the ice and then they'd just bring the ice, right? That was what they did. Not one of those ice block companies ended up transitioning to and becoming successful in refrigeration, right? When we started to then have actual refrigerators where became an ice box in and of itself. Not one of them. Because they were doing their thing. They were doing, I'm delivering the ice. That's what I do. That's my product, right? So you couldn't have that one product and you without any research and development, but you're not going to be very successful. So you need both of these ideas in your life. There are the things that we know how to do and very efficiently that get put into our operations department. So that's the survival driven primitive brain. This is the things like, how do we drink a glass of water? How do we get up in the morning? How do we lie down? How do we, hold a pen? How do we walk down the steps? All of those things. How do we clean our teeth? So those are the habits. That's our operations department. But we also need a research and development piece of our human being function, right? This is where we're going out learning new stuff. We're all about learning new stuff. These are the tasks that require more concentration. That's why we have a separate department for it. We have a separate piece of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that focuses on this. And when we talk about this, right, this needs more brain power because it's new. If you've got a new project, you're starting to learn a new language, you're learning an instrument, you're making a new cake recipe, you're starting a business, whatever it is, it requires a lot more concentration because you have not had as much exposure to it. You have not got the habits in place yet. So as a human, we have both elements. And that's a good thing. Now, over your life, you are going to see some of these habits come and go. They will come and they will go. And not all habits stick with us forever. You may have noticed this yourself. You likely will if you think about it. And this can be even things that you enjoy and certainly things that you don't enjoy. Now, for instance, there was a time when I lived in Germany and I got into a habit of eating Ritter Sport chocolate. This particular brand of chocolate. They have lots of different types, hazelnut, the caramel, all the rest of it. I would eat lots of the varieties. And I really got into quite a habit of eating this Ritter Sport chocolate. What was fascinating was when I left Germany and I returned to the UK, I stopped that habit of eating the Ritter Sport. And it didn't translate into my eating then the Cadbury's chocolate. Right? The habit died on the vine. You've probably seen this yourself. And what I see happen is that what I call the stickiness of a habit, how much we keep doing it, comes down to the reward. While the reward for me of eating the Ritter Sport chocolate was fairly high, it patently wasn't high enough to have me go out and search out that same reward when I moved house. The UK sells this chocolate. I could have had this chocolate imported. Right? It wouldn't have been beyond me to have found a solution there, but it just wasn't such a reward that I was motivated to go out and carry on eating it. And so I just stopped. I'd had a couple of years of eating quite a lot of it, and then all of a sudden, I wasn't. So I want you to see this. I want you to see that not all habits, when you have them, that they stick forever and ever. Because it can feel very uncomfortable when we find ourselves trapped in our habits. That's how it can feel. That's how I used to feel about the white wine. I really felt very trapped by it. Right? So when we find ourselves doing and repeating a habit, in many ways it feels as though it's against our own will. I would often talk about drinking behind my own back. I didn't want to do it, and yet here I was doing it. Now, why does this happen? Why do we end up doing this? Why do we maintain and do this behavior that we really don't want? It's because we don't just experience the reward at the end of the habit action, right? For instance, we don't so when we've had the drink, we get the buzz, we get the dopamine when we're having the drink. But that's not the only time that we experience the reward. Our brains start to catalogue what happens before we get that reward. Now, our brains, remember, are reward detectors. They're like heat-seeking missiles for reward and pleasure. We love pleasure. So when our brain understands what the factors are that are involved in the run-up to us getting the drink, it's keen to repeat that because it really wants to experience that reward again. Right? And this is what happens when we notice the triggers. And we notice the triggers create in the brain a craving. Now remember, a craving is nothing to be worried about. It's simply a way to motivate us to take action. It's the feeling that keeps the habit in operation, and it's not always something that we don't like, right? For instance, not wanting to have that yucky feeling in your mouth is what keeps us cleaning our teeth, for instance. It's totally optional to clean our teeth. Even, we have a habitual response to doing it. We could just drop that. But we are unlikely to because we don't like how we feel when we haven't cleaned our teeth. Right? That's it. So a craving or an urge is a way to motivate, to drive us to take action. And how you respond to cravings in itself becomes part of the habit. For example, the more you have the drink after the craving, for one, right? So you really have a craving and you just say, right, I'm just going to drink now. The more you're reinforcing that part of the habit, right? You're making it much quicker between the thought that I want to drink or the desire to have to satisfying that. You're making that smaller and smaller and smaller. You're closing the desire reward loop. Even if you're resisting in the middle of that, right? And trying to be strong and tough on yourself and all that, if you still ultimately go ahead and have the drink, you are still strengthening those neural pathways for the drink. So the habit is created by you in your brain. It is conditioned behavior that you have taught yourself. Such excellent news, because it means all those things we typically worry about. How are we going to handle happy hour? How are we going to handle our friend's reaction? How are we going to handle it when our husband says, oh, I so wanted to split a bottle of wine with you. It's so romantic. How are we going to handle what other people will say generally, if they're drinking? We don't need to worry about any of that stuff. None of it. And that's good news, actually, because we don't control any of it. All this means is that to change a habit, we do this by treating our brains, not the external cause. And the way we do this is to extinguish the reward answer every time we have an urge to drink. Because you see, the thing about alcohol is that the reward is such an intense bombardment so that our neural pathway becomes so much more ingrained till it almost seems unconscious. It's because our brain is just so keen to get that dopamine reward. I mean, really consider this. You could love, for instance, carrots. You could love carrots. You are not going to find yourself in the position of thinking, oh, I've got to have a plate of carrots now. It's because the dopamine response is far less. So a habit and the reward that comes from a habit is highly significant. But because it's harder to achieve a new result around alcohol than maybe carrots, for instance, I'm telling you, I got pleasure when I was doing this work simply from that accomplishment, simply from seeing you go, girl, look what you did. You really wanted the drink. You allowed the urge to be there. You didn't make it a problem. And look, you didn't take the drink. You didn't have the reward. You didn't have that dopamine response. But the dopamine response changes. And in the moment, I'm not talking about the next day here. In the moment, you can feel good and so proud of yourself. I can't understate the importance of the strength of the reward response enough. For instance, I've had people tell me, and they were kind of confused by this, that they managed to remove gluten from their diet more easily than they could change their relationship with alcohol. And so we spoke about this. And here's what I learned, that when they had gluten in their diet, they were feeling bad pretty much a lot of the day. They kind of had this undercurrent of just not feeling great. And when they learned that it was because they weren't good at processing gluten, and when they learned that if they removed things like bread from their lives, they would feel so much better on such a daily basis, it kind of made it easier. I mean, even if they really love bread and all the baked goods, if they knew that as a result of eating that, they were just going to feel pretty rubbish all the time, to them, it just wasn't worth it, right? The compelling, the feeling of eating the bread, the joy they might have experienced from that was completely eclipsed by the negative feelings for the rest of the day. I want you to think about that, right? If you really were to feel bad all of the time, let's say you were drinking, or if you felt bad just all the time, you had this undercurrent of just not feeling great, to quit would be, or to drink less would be so much easier, right? We have these hangovers, but they don't last all the time. And even if you have a hangover that feels pretty bad for a few days, it's going to go off within a week or so, and then you can be right back to it. And in fact, I have people tell me they find it hard to change their drinking because they don't suffer from hangovers. They used to think it was a really cool thing. It was really good, but now they don't, it's sort of, there's no impediment for them. So I want you to notice how compelling is your reason for drinking and your compelling reason for not drinking. If we did have that hangover feeling the whole time, we really would not be drinking as much. If it were like gluten, right? And the more we drank, the worse we felt pretty much all the time. I mean, I think back to the early stages of pregnancy when I just had that nauseous feeling the whole time. If that were the result of drinking, I would have given up drinking just like that. Nothing would have been worth, no amount of short-term dopamine pleasure would have meant that was worth feeling that nauseous pretty much 24/7, right? All to do with how we see the reward and what reward we want to see for ourselves instead. If we're more interested in the reward of feeling good about ourselves in our lives as a whole, rather than for the 20 minutes when we're drinking the wine in the moment, our actions are going to be so different. This can take time. But this is how we rebuild the habit. And again, understanding the role that reward plays in this is super critical. I actually have an equation for you here. I'm going to write this down. Desire minus reward equals a weakening habit, right? Because the key point for me was when I realized that my desire for the wine could be present without having the reward. This is basically another way of saying I could have an urge without following through on it and having a drink. When that happened, it changed for me. Because I saw I was capable of wanting something, not having it. I totally am. And you are too. You do this every single day of your life. You just don't attribute the same amount of meaning to it. You might feel like eating a slice of cake, at 3 p.m, but you probably just don't down tools and rush off and get it. There's a handbag I have my eye on at the moment. And I don't think I want to just go and buy it. No. It's the same thing with alcohol. You are capable of wanting the drink and not rushing off and having it. This is so significant because as soon as there is no reward, the strength of the habit loosens its grip. There is less motivation you will feel. And this happens every single time you allow an urge. This can seem very confusing. But I want you to see that right now your desire is connected to the alcohol. But when you can have the desire and no reward, i.e. you're going to have the desire for the alcohol, but don't reward yourself with the alcohol, the desire is going to reduce bit by bit by bit. This is the great thing about habits. Because to our brains, all habits are the same. They're just repeat behavior. Like I said just now, they tend to focus on, zero in on those where there's a strong reward attached, but our brains don't know whether something's good or bad. They're just all the same. And as our brains are efficient and really rather lazy, as in we won't put ourselves out if we don't have to, we're all about conserving energy, which is all to do with survival. If we stop playing ball, if we stop doing the thing that our brains are trying to motivate us to do, such as have the drink, then in time, our brains will simply stop suggesting that we drink as an activity. Because making these suggestions to have them ignored by us the whole time takes effort. And when it realizes that we aren't following through, we're not playing ball, we're not being motivated to have the drink, so the brain is then missing out on that reward, it's not going to want to put the effort in. Do this enough and your brain will stop encouraging you to drink. I know this is true because this has happened for my clients and it happened for me. I never, ever, ever, ever have any desire for the wine. Ever. I cannot say it more simply than that. I never want the wine. And I used to want the wine so much. So in summary, you are the controller of your habits. You, my friend, just you. You create them, you sustain them, you feed them, you water them. You and no one else. Habits are strengthened and maintained by the reward. When our brain tells us to do stuff, such as go and get a drink, and when we obey that and get the reward, for instance, by having the drink, our brain is going to want to keep telling us to do this. This is just like the toddler screaming for the chocolate bar in the shop. Every time you give in, it's going to see this is the way to get the chocolate, the easy way, of course. Right? And of course, we're going to want to continue to do these things because we like the way it feels. Even if we know with our logical brain it's not what we want, even if we know logically it's not good for our health, we still like the way it feels and we want more of that. We just will want to. We are pleasure seeking missiles. But if you ignore that neural pathway, if you don't pay any attention to the urges, you let them be there and let them go, eventually these urges, these cravings, they serve no purpose in our life. They are completely superfluous and the habit will wither on the vine. It's just like when you change job. You might sometimes find yourself driving to your old place of work for a bit, but then the more you drive to your new place of work, the more you just won't have the habit of driving to your old place of work until maybe you can't even remember how to get to your old place of work. So that's it for today. And if you're listening to this, and if you've been listening to me for a while, and I know many of you have, if you're thinking perhaps, I've drunk so much this festive season, right, I'm only halfway through, we're only just over Christmas, and I'm just always so sozzled, and I really wish I could just do this. Just change my drinking, change my relationship with alcohol. I could always just decide how much I want to drink and drink just that and stop breaking my word to myself. Now, my friend, is the time to secure your spot on my coaching calendar starting in January. As you may imagine, January is a very, very busy month for me. So if you want to change your relationship with alcohol, if you want to take it or leave it, if you just want to stop dry, January becoming this annual event, or maybe you want to stop drinking completely, or you want to moderate, however that looks for you, now is the time to act. Now. So you can start seeking different rewards in your life than alcohol. The way you do this is simple. Go to my website, 90dayslater.co, and click on the book a call link at the top. Or you can email me on anna@90dayslater.co. That's it for now. And in the meantime, I want to wish you a very happy new year. And look out for this announcement I mentioned in my last podcast about how I'm changing my podcast material from January 2024 onwards. But in the meantime, I wish you a really super happy, healthy and prosperous new year, and I'll see you soon.